Hi, and welcome back to the Digital Job Site for part 2 of the Exploring Octagonal Roof Framing with SketchUp blog post at the Digital Jobsite blog at findhomebuilding.com. In the first video, I showed in depth the various components that make up this octagonal framed roof, which is one way of building such a structure. And in this tutorial, this video, I wanted to show, as promised, some of the techniques I used for creating the components for this model. It's a fun process with SketchUp, and with the tools it has to offer, you can make this a lot of fun. And there's just a few tricks that I used to create this model, and they worked well for getting the job done. So to do that, we'll wade in here. I'm going to shut off the shadows and I'm going to make a group of all this stuff, slide it off out here in the distance and hide it so it gets out of our road. And I'll just jump in and start another model to show the steps. And these steps are the same whether you're drawing an octagon, a hexagon, a pentagon, dodecagon, whatever you want. The steps are pretty much the same, and I start out by drawing you can either draw a circle here, or you can take the triangle tool and just tell. What I do is I'll go with the triangle tool for this example, which is set now for 6 sides. We're just going to draw this out to, let's say, an 84-inch radius, which would be 7 feet. And I'll click this out, right click it, and put a point at the center, and then go to the entity info. There's 6 segments there, we want it to be 8, so all of a sudden with those steps we have an octagon. And I learned during this process that you can actually divide this just like you can divide a line. You can see down in the value control box the number of segments is changing. So as we go to 8 segments, or 6 or 5 or 7, so if we just type 7 and enter, I think something jumped there. But it will, you can do the same thing by to create the number of facets that you want. There's a nonagon, whatever the heck that's called. But anyways, our purpose here is to have an 8-sided figure, which we have, with a point at the center. I'm going to make a group out of this whole thing and then rotate the group. And what I want to do is, let's see, we're going to go back. I'm going to move this so that this, oops, I want this to be a group. So I'm going to group this. I hit my back key there and exploded the group I had made. So I'm just going to take the group and move it so that the point at the center is at the point of origin. And I'm going to explode it, grab the rotate tool. Somewhere in that process I switched this back to a hexagon, which we don't want. So we want to grab this and make this 8. That's the dangers of having a back key programmed into my mouse. Anyways, okay, now we have an octagon with a center in it. I'm going to grab the rotate tool and the midpoint on one of these sides and swing that around so it lines with these axes. Makes this all a little easier to work with. Now I'm going to group that. And there we have an octagon of the size we want to end up with a point at the center. The next step that I'll do is create the little octagon core for the top of the roof. And as I said, I'm going to, in this example, I'm going to make a 16-sided core, which would simplify the rafter cutting, as I kind of delved into a little bit in the first part of this video. But to do this, there's my back button again. I'm just going to start out with a rectangle, and I want that to be 12 inches, comma 1.5 inches. So it's 12 by 1.5 inches. I got this little piece. And the reason I'm using 1.5 inches is because we're talking about framing this with 1.5 inch thick framing material. So I've got a rectangle. I'm going to make it a group. Go into that rectangle, and what I want to do is get a point at the center of this. So if we just take the tape measure tool, index to the centers of these, we have a block with the center marked on. So I can grab this, and because I want to make a block with 16 facets, I'm actually going to take this thing and I'm going to rotate it. I'm going to press Control and rotate it 45 degrees. And 2x enter, actually I want 3x enter. And that gives me not enough. I've kind of got this slowed down a little bit. Explode this group. Find our center. This thing jumping all over the place. So there's our piece. Group this. Select the group. Rotate tool. Hit the Control key. Get on the center point here. Click this. Go 22.5, 5 degrees, and then 6x. So we want 7x. Enter. So that gives us 16 separate faces. So now I'll take this whole business here and make a group out of it. And all I'm doing here is creating a 16-sided figure with 1.5 inch faces. So now I can take this circle, go up here, tell SketchUp 16 faces, not 24. And so you can see that on this new 16-sided figure, each of the faces is 1.5 inches wide, and the 1.5 inch faces are set where each of those 16 rafters would intersect. So that's what the whole process was for. If you were making a pentagon, you could use the same process by multiplying out your little 1.5 inch blocks 10 times instead of 16. The process is the same. So I'm going to take this piece here and move it. I'm going to be upset with myself because, no, I can still get a point at the center. I thought that I had missed the step and couldn't do that. All this stuff over here just ends up being digital trash. We'll throw that out. This is our 16-sided piece. I'm going to make a group out of it. And then, as I've said before in these models, I put those center points in, so I can grab this little block at the center point, line it up with the center point in the octagon. Now I'm going to edit this little group, and we're just going to pull this face up. Oops. I'm going to raise this up, let's just say 12 inches for this example. Click the top of this, put a point at the center so we have a point top and bottom. And for whatever reason, when I go through this process, SketchUp has smoothed all the edges in this, but we want to see those edges. So I'm going to right click, go smooth soften edges, and there we go. And by using the soften edges in reverse, we get all the lines to show up. So that gives us an octagonal center block to use for our ridge. This would be a little tricky to make out of lumber, but it could be done with a number of layers of inch and a half material or 3/4 inch plywood to give you a solid center block. Anyways, that's the process that I use for creating the center block that fits perfectly with the model that we're working on. And you'll also notice that the centers of these faces line up with the axes in the model. That's where the rafters are going to end up. And I apologize for the slightly convoluted process I ended up using to get that done. Anyways, with the center block created, the next thing to do is to create a common rafter. And anybody that's seen previous videos of mine know that I use like a drawing plane to get this stuff, to make these things come together. So I'm just going to draw a rectangle out here in space, and then I'm going to move this bottom line down in the blue axis just to make our drawing plane big enough. And then we'll take that whole drawing plane and make a group out of it, so now we can draw on it. And we'll jump back into this part here, this first octagon component. Select the perimeter and the offset tool. And I'm just going to bring this in 3.5 inches and then delete this center part. And then, just for grins, I'm going to drop this down 1.5 inches, and that would represent the wall plates, octagonal wall plates. And these are all these, like I've been saying, I think I'm probably repeating myself, but these are the steps that I would use to create a roof of any number of facets. And I think that I have created a pentagonal roof just for grins during this process. I've done a lot of drawing to get this series together, but I have a pentagonal roof model somewhere, and I intend to upload that into the component warehouse just for entertainment's sake. So going forward, the next thing, like I said, is to make a common rafter here. Now I've got this drawing plane, and let's say that we want a 9/12 pitch on this gazebo. So I'm just taking the protractor tool, indexing it to the inside of that wall plate, and I'm going to go 9:12, which will give us a pitch. You can enter that as an angle in degrees also, but I'm just going to use a 9/12 pitch. And let's pretend that we need 2x6 rafters. So I'm going to draw a parallel line 5.5 inches away, and that'll be fine. And then we'll take our little core block here, and I want to raise this thing up, not stretch it up, raise it up in the blue direction. I'm going to grab it by a center point right here, if I can zoom in carefully. Grab it right at that center point and move it up in the blue direction until it hits this diagonal line. Okay? This will give us the surface for our common rafter. And here again, this is the same method I use in the Model and Measure series, Off-Angle Roof Framing series, all the different series. This is how I draw rafters. I'll stop at this point and do two things. One is to offset this a ½ inch for our sheathing, 0.5, and then from the sheathing I'm going to go out 14 inches, which would give us an overhang and an overhang of 16 inches using 1.5 inch fascia. And just for grins, I'm going to go down 12 inches with this little bottom seat cut. Okay, so we'll take this line out, and continue the rafter drawing process using these dotted guidelines to form our rafter. Clickety clickety click, here we go. And once that rafter is completed, I can double click it, hold down the shift key, and carefully select everything else in that and delete it, and end up with just the rafter outline, which was the whole point of that last series of steps. So now we have a face, and I'm going to bring that face out 0.75, and then bring the other face out 0.75, which gives us an 1.5 inch thick rafter, and you can see how it fits perfectly on that face of our 16-gon. So I'm going to triple click that rafter, right click it. I'm going to make it a component in this instance, and I'm going to go 9, 12 common, because I already have a full-length common rafter component in this model for the other one I used for the tutorial. Anyway, so there I've created the rafter, and then with the center guide point, which I keep emphasizing, I have selected that common rafter. I'm going to grab the rotate tool, and I can use any one of these center points. I can use the one at the bottom or the one at the top of this octagon core. Hit the control key, index to that, click out here somewhere and go 45. 5, enter, 6x, enter. You can see that doesn't get quite all the way around, so I can just override that with a 7x, enter. And that gives us the common rafters for the model, just like that. And then the hip rafters are created in much the same way, with a little bit different notching at the bird's mouth, etc. So let's go through that process. This will make the video kind of long, but I hope that it's worth the extra effort. What I'm doing is going in here and copying the perimeter of the wall plates and the center point. I'm just going to copy that. I'm then going to get out of that group mode and paste this back in and make this a group. This is just a reference for the height of the hip rafters. Okay, so there's our group, and now I'm going to raise it up in the blue direction. I've got it going on the blue axis, and I want to raise it up to this point, which I got myself in trouble because I need to draw a guideline here from this vertical line into the plates. So now when we take our group and raise it up, we have a target for SketchUp to go to. So I'm just going to raise this perimeter line, and what that does is shows the height that the hip needs to be so that all these facets of the roof plane out. So we'll just leave that group in place for a minute, and then I'm going to go through the same process we used for creating the common rafter. I'm just going to start up here on the blue axis. Get this to index here. Okay, we'll start at a point down here. I'm just going to draw out here. Here's our plane. I'm going to make a group out of it. Actually, let's just make it a component at this point, and we're going to call it hip. And we're going to replace the selection with this component. So here's our hip component. I'm going to select that little thing. Here again, going to one of these center points. Grab this plane on the red axis, and I'm going to spin it over and index it right on that 45-degree mark. So you can see that this plane is intersecting one of these other 1.5 inch faces right at the middle and intersecting the plates right at the center. So we're going to go into this component. Sometimes I make it as a group, switch it into a component or whatever. In this case I'm just making it a component early. So now we have a plane just where we want it. And we're going to draw onto that plane some guidelines. And the first guideline is going to start right at this intersection. Start the horizontal and go up to the top of this block. And we're going to assume that 2x6s will work for the hips also. So we'll come down here 5.5. And that gives us the center of the hip rafter. And we'll just go through the same process again. One of these days I'll get video editing software and I can just fast forward through this stuff and save the boredom, but at this point I don't have that yet, so I'm going to do it the more tedious way here. Going to these intersections, I'm just going to go out this direction a little more. I haven't accurately set this up for the fascia and stuff. Those are kind of technicalities. Basically the process is to create the hip rafter. So here again I'll double click our rafter, hold shift and select everything and delete that, so we end up with just with the rafter. Pull this over this way, 0.75. Try to pivot around here a little bit. Pull it the other way, 0.75. By double clicking, I got it to do the same amount. So there's a hip rafter that planes out with the common rafters. And we've gone through enough minutes of this video that I don't want to start it over, but you can see I made a mistake.
Avast virus database.
Oh, nice. Thanks, Avast. Anyways, I planed the rafter out, centered up on the intersection there, and I should have done that whole process starting off at the side so that the hip rafter would intersect on the side. So I'm going to have to go back and take this stuff out. Okay. And take this whole, let's go like this. I'm going to pull this. Okay. I apologize for this mess up, but it gives you the idea that things don't always go smoothly. Anyways, I'm going to see if I can get this to draw a parallel line. It's not going to draw a parallel line for me, so I'm going to have to back out of that. It's just giving me an intersection. I'm going to get a parallel line here yet. Okay, there's a parallel line. I want it down here at the face of this intersection. Now I can go into the component. Selecting everything, I'm just going to move this over 3/4 of an inch. And that's where I should have started this process. So we'll just zip back through the steps here with the rotate tool, or the protractor tool. Now I'm going to use the intersection of that plane line at the face of the rafter instead of the center of the rafter. So that these things plane out. There's that. Again here, let's pretend a 5.5 inch 2x6 will get the job done. And just trace around those. And I'm not going through the detail here of, I do want to make sure we hit that intersection point. I have to go around the other side here. There it is. All kinds of activity online here tonight. Going to take that line out. Just going to draw this from the other side of the plane here, where it's a little less constricted. There we go. I want to make sure I have the right intersections. Just going to continue this line a little bit out so that the rafter would theoretically clear the sheathing. I'm going to run it long, not paying attention to the intersection of the fascia. It's a little bit of a technicality for the process. I kind of want to show how to get the hip rafter itself created. So invert the selection, delete these guidelines, and now because I did that the way I should have the first time. Just have to pull this face of this rafter over 1.5 inches to give us a completed 22.5 angle hip rafter, which is a component. This line exists outside the component. Now, when I zoom in here, I'm not as embarrassed as last time. This shows that the edges of the hip rafter are coplanar with the tops of the common rafter, which is the way it should be. And if a person was getting very technical, they would bevel the top of the hip rafter to meet this plane point. But in reality, the sheathing will easily carry that or bridge that little bit of a gap. But through that whole convoluted and somewhat embarrassing process, I have a 22.5 hip rafter, which by selecting, hitting the control key, indexing to a center point, pivoting it around 45 degrees, and then going 7x, we've created the main framing for an octagonal roof. The process is the same for a pentagon or a hexagon or a septagon, whatever the person would decide to use, and can draw a rectangle here. I guess it'll end up being a trapezoid, but you can see with the process that these things are coplanar, so that the roof sheathing would lay flat on it. But there you have it. Kind of long-winded and complex, but those are the methods that I developed for drawing this. I'm sure if a person was drawing these for a living, they'd come up with ways that are faster and somewhat more efficient. But this got the job done and created the model. Then I went through and textured, added textures and projected textures and everything in the model to dress it up to what you see on the models that I uploaded to the component warehouse. So we're going to unhide these, and you can get the idea of how I created this rough geometry of the rafters and then added projected textures onto it to give it a look of various kinds of lumber, or I guess I didn't use any microlamps here, but 1x sheathing, plywood sheathing, 2x4s, etc., to give the model a little more realistic appearance. Same with the fascia. So there you have it. Those are some of the methods I use for creating the octagonal roof model for exploring octagonal roof framing with SketchUp blog post at the digital job site at findhomebuilding.com. If you've stayed with me through the whole process, I commend you. I hope this has been helpful enough to make it worth your time. Thanks for stopping by the digital job site.